So you might have to do something there. Good afternoon. Hello, welcome. And my name is Craig Rebuck, and my guest is Gabrielle Pelicci. Would you prefer to be doctor? Would you just prefer Gabrielle? What would you like?
It's funny, my students call me Dr. Gabby, which is sort of a common term, and friends just call me Gabby. So yeah, whatever you're comfortable with.
Okay. Maybe you might end up a little bit of both. So I am here on behalf of both the Healing Awareness Week here in the UK, which is an annual event taking place between the 1st and the 7th of May, and also Mental Health Awareness Week, which is taking place a little bit further on in the month, between the 15th of May and the 21st of May. And we're here a little bit to discuss about you, Dr. Gabby, and your book, which is entitled All This Healing is Killing Me, a memoir, which is published by the Manhattan Group and will be widely available in May. So just pressing on a little bit, I want to assume that this is going to be a bit of a mixed audience who are either going to be watching our video or listening to the recording, who may not have yet read your book or had the opportunity. So maybe it's a little bit of a generic type of mixed audience, both public and professional. So maybe let's not get too technical, because we could end up quite technical. So I have a small series of questions, and just depending on how long you want to share. I'm going to start with my first question, which is, could you share a little bit about yourself, maybe a little bit about your credentials, which is interesting, and why you wanted to write this book?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for having me. I think, I'll just start by saying that the conversation that we're going to have, it covers healing and mental health, and a lot of difficult concepts and situations are described in my book around abuse and trauma and violence and suicide and things like that. And what I'm finding in these conversations is that it's much more common than I expected. And the story is resonating with people of all ages and all professions, which was also a bit unexpected. And the story in the book, All This Healing is Killing Me, is one that is uplifting. And the reason I preface my introduction by saying that is because it's been my life's work to study transformation and healing. I'm a professor of holistic medicine for the last 17 years. And it was my intention with the writing that the writing served as medicine for myself, telling the story, and then for other people who are engaging with the story so that they might feel more empowered or inspired to share their own experiences as well. And I talk a lot about my journey in the book, as well as my dissertation research, interviewing women healers from different cultures around the world. I'm certified in a number of different things, different kinds of yoga practices, meditation, mind-body medicine, permaculture, herbalism, massage therapy, because this has been the work that I've been doing for my whole life. And I've currently landed in the Department of Psychedelics Medicine, which maybe at the end we can touch on that. It's not really central to the book, but I am working in psychedelics medicine now in research and education, supporting people to use that kind of medicine for mental health, addiction, depression, anxiety, because I do think that it shows a lot of promise in addition to a lot of these other practices that I've mentioned.
Okay. That reminds me of the Sheldrakes are writing books about the psychedelics, which is quite interesting. And maybe we could talk about that a little bit towards the end.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the book itself. And I sort of picked up something that says if the title of this of the book is This Healing is Killing Me, resonates with you, then this book is for you. This is a specific quote that you put forward. You either get it or you don't. And if you've been doing any kind of physical or mental healing, including personal growth and spiritual transformation, then you will understand the meaning of this book and you will benefit from the story. Could you say a little bit more about this for those people that are at the beginning of their journey? And what do you mean by the complexity of "you'll get it"?
Mhm. So this phenomenon happened once I decided that this was the title of the book, and I started sharing the title of the book, where people would just start laughing as soon as I said it. As soon as I said, "all this healing is killing me," people would just burst into laughter. And that emotional response was an indication that they knew what I was talking about. And when I say know what I'm talking about, if you're someone who has been in psychotherapy or couples counseling or recovering from cancer or a car accident, and you're on the journey of doing all of the work that it takes to create restoration, to create well-being, to mend your relationships, if you've done that work, at some point doing that work, you've gotten really frustrated and you've gotten really overwhelmed, and you're not quite sure if you prefer the original problem or the actual therapeutic work that you're doing, you know? And it could be something as simple as a diet or a detox. You know, someone tells you to give up sugar for a month. At some point, you might be like, do I want to be overweight, or do I, like, at some point, you're like, this is just too hard. And I do believe that when we engage in personal growth and spiritual transformation and healing therapeutic work, I do think it's a warrior's path. I do think that if we're really doing the heavy lifting of clearing out any kind of psychic garbage, of coming into alignment with our purpose, you know, creating a future for ourselves and the planet that's really healthy, I do think that that is really, really challenging. And there are going to be times where you feel like you might want to give up. And so part of my story is to hopefully encourage you not to give up and to keep going, because I do think that on the other side of that is the liberation that we're looking for.
You know, it reminds me that this is something that you've been working with for 20, 30 odd years, and even trying to find the interface of how it is, how it all resonates together. And I guess I'm going to challenge you a little bit, because I'm more about those people that are at the early part of their journey. They're spinning all these odd plates in their life, and they have no idea how they stack together. What would you do? What would you say to help those people? Because you've been stacking plates for a long time, using that as an interesting analogy. But you know, it's stuff on their plates. They don't know what it is. It's spirituality, it's mental health, it's drug addiction, it's overeating, it's bereavement, whatever the different bits are. And yet there's all these tiny little teaspoons of hope. How can you help people to recognize that at the very beginning, and not just say don't give up? Because I think that's too easy.
Yeah. One thing that I think is significant is restoring your relationship with yourself first and foremost, because we've been outsourcing healing to everybody, you know, medical professionals and government, and like we outsource all of that. And I think that's part of the fundamental problem of why we feel so disempowered and lost, because what I hear you describing is the sense of overwhelm and feeling lost. And I think a lot of it is because we're not in touch with our own intuitive capacity to make the best decisions for ourselves. I think intuitively we know what to eat. I think intuitively we know to go put our feet in the grass, or to resurrect that creative practice that we've been neglecting, or intuitively we know the relationship that we're in isn't serving us and we need to leave. Like, I really believe that people already know everything that they need. And I think the challenge is making change. It's the last thing that most of us want to do. And there's a lot of obstacles to making that change. And the most critical ingredient to being successful with change is having support of a good friend, or a coach, or a therapist, or a man's group or a ladies group. You know, the support is the critical thing to help you to implement the things that you already know that you need to implement. I don't really think there's anything I could tell you that you need to do differently that you wouldn't already know. And I think the way you know is there's a resonance. Like I mentioned with the book, if you pick up the book and it resonates, you're like, oh, this is my truth as well. And those resonance are the ways that you can navigate if you don't have the picture as a clear map of like exactly what to do. It's the resonance that allows you to take one step at a time until you get where you need to go.
I've often shared that image with people about being on a little bus journey, and every so often getting off at a bus stop and having a look around, and sometimes you miss the stop because you were not concentrating, and you might have to go back and find the bus stop again and just go and find things. So I think that's what you're saying a little bit, but I like your warrior image, to have that courage of conviction. We have a wonderful original queen here called Boadicea or Boudicca. She was the first in Britain back in the early hundreds, and she was a fierce warrior. In fact, if you go to central London on Hyde Park Corner, there's a huge statue of her, and she resonates the power of going for it. So it's quite interesting that you talk about that. So just to share that little bit of information about the UK in its own way. My next question is, we speak a lot about people's vulnerability at a time of crisis and their openness to fear and an intuitive awareness about spirituality and spiritual experiences. In fact, in your biography, it actually says you specialize in creating well-being at the intersection of integrative health, spirituality, and storytelling, which I think is a really beautiful little description. Maybe can you explain a little bit more of that in bite-sized, digestible format?
Yeah, I think we're storied beings. I think narration is who we are to a large extent. And that narration is the story you're always telling yourself about who you are, what you can and can't do, how you feel, how you're judging yourself, how you're judging others. That narration, the larger narration, the story that you're telling yourself and others about your life. I always fail. I always make mistakes, versus things are always working out for me. I'm the luckiest girl that I know, that story and that narration, it's not just an art form. I think that on a cellular level, it determines a lot of our physical and mental health. I think it determines opportunities that come to us. I think it determines outcomes of jobs and relationships and things like that. So I think storytelling is really important. I think first having an awareness of what those stories are, and then learning how to write better stories for ourselves, for our lives, for our future. And so that's why storytelling is significant to me. And the reason that it intersects with spirituality and health is because, like I said, the stories can determine a lot of how we feel. There's even something in medicine called psychoneuroimmunology. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but psycho is the mind and the thoughts, neuro is the nervous system, and immunology is that protection against illness. And when that's moving in a positive direction, we have a strong immunity, and a negative direction, we have a weaker immunity. And so I do think that biologically there is that connection. And then spiritually, one of the findings of my dissertation research was that all medical traditions for all of time until the last 200 years or so, spirituality was integral to physical and mental health. You couldn't separate the two. It would be an absurdity to go to your local healer or shaman or acupuncturist. It would be absurd to go and to describe symptoms and to not have that reflected back to you in some sort of spiritual condition. And the way that they understood spirituality wasn't necessarily a god in a church or a temple or an ashram or something like that. The way they understood spirituality was a life force energy that permeates everything, yourself and nature and the food that you eat and the water that you drink. And that if those things are balanced and your body is balanced, then you're going to have, good health, you're going to have harmony, you're going to have happiness. And if not, if there's that depletion there, then you're going to suffer as a result of that. So my worldview is a very global perspective of medicine, probably leaning more towards the Eastern philosophies when it comes to medicine, and then how that integrates with, what we know about epigenetics and neuroscience and all the, modern awareness of brain and mental health. So Was that bite-sized enough or too much fancy
Yeah,
words?
no, I know that epigenetics will be something that is a new word for a lot of people, and holistic approach, and obviously Eastern medicine is something else. Maybe you could just say what epigenetics is, just to keep people happy.
Yeah, I mean, we're starting to learn that there's a history to our health that goes
Yeah.
beyond just whatever you did today or even whatever you just did in the short term. We're starting to see. There's also another term that I really enjoy. I don't name it specifically in my book, but it's called generational trauma. There's also these ideas that things can be acquired from family, that you can accumulate some stuff uh, that maybe wasn't initiated in the short term, but that still is affecting you and affecting your well-being. And so yeah, it's a reframing, because we've kind of put ourselves in a very individualized society, and it's good to have self-responsibility and self-care and self-help and self-improvement. Those are all really great. Those are really, really great things. We have to understand we're part of a network. That's one of the reasons why I love mushrooms and the mycelium network, is because we're part of a network, and that network extends all around us in our people and our environment and nature, and it extends to our ancestors and things that have come before us, and it extends out into the spiritual realms, and I think to be able to see us more connected and reframing in that way, it alleviates some of that shaming spiral, that shame spiral that we get into with our practices.
So I'm gonna sort of back a little bit. So at one level, you're talking about transgenerational trauma, things that are handed down from our parents, grandparents, etc. And then you're also talking about the energetic connection that we have in the world as human beings. And I'm going to go a little bit off piece here. Can you talk about that energetic sense a little bit more? Because I think that's where the spirituality comes in a little. Can you share something about how that may have evolved pre and post COVID? Because it feels as though there's a shift that's taken place, and I don't know whether that resonates for you.
Yeah, I hope there's a shift. For tens of thousands of years, we have evidence of writings around the mystical nature of things, the mystery of nature, being able to connect and to communicate with ancestors, to sense the energetics of a tree or a flower, to go into altered states and to communicate with the bees or with the vines, right? This is part of every lineage of every culture, whether it was the ancient Greeks who were in fertility ceremonies, whether it was in the ancient Amazon where shamans were facilitating plant medicine circles. Like anywhere you look in history, you'll see that there was evidence of altered states, awareness of consciousness, connectedness to the energetics, the subtle essence, the spirit of things. And then slowly that had been sterilized and removed, and we've gotten away from it. And the unfortunate thing is that when I started to have my experiences of experiencing nature in a more sentient way and connecting with my parents after they passed, and when I started to have all these things, I thought I was crazy. Did you lose the audio? Are you good? I started to think I was crazy because there was no context for my experience in Western culture. And so I ended up picking up the Tibetan Book of the Dead and reading a lot of yogic philosophy and exploring old mystical traditions. And then I was like, well, there's evidence of this for tens of thousands of years. So clearly I'm not crazy. But also, no one's having this conversation in 1995, 2005, 2023. Like, it's still this taboo, and it almost feels as if people are nervous to admit that they're having these experiences for fear of how they'll be perceived or judged, or what stigma there is attached to those deep connections. So in Chinese and Ayurvedic medicine, energy runs through everything. It runs through meridians in your body, which you can tap into through acupuncture points. In India, it runs through chakras, which are spinning wheels of energetic movement that are happening throughout the body. Part of the practice of yoga and meditation is bringing these into alignment, as well as Tai Chi and Qigong and different pranayama and breathwork exercises. All of this is targeting the energetics. And then food, all food has energetic properties. And we see that evidence of that because some are warm and some are cold and some are bitter and some are pungent and some are sweet. And this is all evidence of those properties of things. And so you can explore this in a lot of different ways, in food, in feelings, in spiritual consciousness. There's a lot of ways to explore it.
So I think that the word spirituality and the essence of spiritual context of the world around us has really become confused and confusing because of the religiosity relationship. And then once you start taking that word down that path, people then go, what are you talking about? But the way that you're describing it and sharing it is this wonderful way of actually seeing the beauty in everything that's around us. And I think that's a really lovely way of simplifying the opportunity to go and find out things, look for yourself. It's the encouraging. And I go back to your lovely word of outsourcing, which is such a perfect word in today's society where everybody outsources all of their jobs, their work. I mean, we're going to start seeing AI getting involved in our outsourcing of our intelligence. So empowering people rather than disempowering. And I think that's what you're really speaking about in this context at this moment.
Yeah, and you had specifically mentioned COVID. And I think one of the reasons COVID was a catalyst was because it was disruptive. We got out of our habitual patterns. A lot of us were at home. And once we were at home, we're like, oh, maybe instead of buying bread, I'm going to make my own bread. That was like a trend that was really popular. Oh, now that I'm home, maybe I'm going to put a garden in the yard, or maybe I'm going to build a deck and I'm going to sit outside on my deck and look at the plants. There was this return to home and there was this return to simplicity. Maybe I'm going to buy a bike. I think I'm going to buy a bike and ride my bike around the neighborhood with the kids. There was this return and a disconnect and a disruption from our habitual consumerism and productivity and commuting and all of those things. And I do think that that helped to serve as a catalyst. I also think that the fact that there was this global health crisis that scared the hell out of everybody, myself included, it also shined a light on what is health? Well, how do I protect my own health, not just in this crisis, but what do I do to take care of myself, and what are some natural ways to do that? So I do think that helped to amplify some of this stuff that was already sort of percolating.
I think that a lot of people are still quite frightened of the repercussions, and I think we are still seeing the shaking of the tree as a result of COVID. And I think it's a bit of a generation. The older, the more that they have sort of retreated out of society. I've noticed that in the work that I do. Okay, last question, because I can see that we could end up having a lot of conversation and I could spend all day listening to you, which is my pleasure. And I'm going to be a little bit personal about something that you wrote on page 10 about your brother.
Okay.
And you said my brother and I, in the context of this, is that you're in the hospital and your mother is passing away. It's time. Your reflection and your anxiety, my sense was confused and what are you doing? But in the aspect of the relationship with your brother, you said, my brother and I sat from morning to night in the hospital waiting room. And we had the kind of relationship that two refugees had in exile. We were trauma bonded even before Mum got sick. And although we shared similar circumstances, we did not share similar perspectives. Now, I wonder if you could say a bit more about this in relation to families and siblings and different perspectives, because I think it's, for me, it was a very beautiful vignette of how families get confused and expectations and hope, and maybe you could say something about that.
Yeah. It's so fun to hear you read it back to me. Nobody reads me my book. So yeah, I'll speak specifically before I speak generally. I grew up in a family with a lot of domestic violence, mental illness, addiction, and that created strong bonds of survival in the same way that comrades in war might feel really bonded, or people who have been kidnapped together, Stockholm syndrome, might feel really bonded, right? So it created an intense, fearful based bonding because the environment was so unstable and dangerous. And so there were very strong bonds there. But just because there are very strong bonds among people, myself and my brother included, doesn't mean that our perceptions were the same. And in this context, my mother treated my brother differently than she treated me. So I was expected to be beautiful and smart and get perfect grades and fulfill a lot of her dreams that she didn't fulfill. So there was a different relationship there. And her relationship with my brother was one of just what I felt was unconditional adoration and appreciation, and wanted him just to be whoever he actually was. And so there was a tension there that was different for us. And as a result, I felt more resentment towards my mom than my brother did. And so their relationships was different, which then impacted my relationship with my brother. And all of these dynamics are unfolding in different ways for different families. I hear this all the time from people where they are doing their own healing work and they desperately wish that their parents or their siblings were also doing the work, because they want more than anything in the world to have that raw intimacy and vulnerability and authenticity with their family of origin. I hear it over and over and over again. It's a really deep desire that a lot of people have. And some people said to me, like, were you able to eventually cultivate this with family members? Is it something that you were able to achieve? And it's yes and no. My brother, and I are now more in alignment than we've ever been. I'm also 48 and he's 45 or 46. I mean, that's like, at the time of that story, that's like 25 or more years ago. So it's been a long journey and it's been a bumpy journey. I do think if you wait long enough, you can find some alignment. It doesn't happen for everybody all the time, but I do think there is healing in time and returning again and again to difficult conversations. Even just in the last few years, I've had to have difficult conversations with my brother where I've had to set strong boundaries, and I've had to say, I don't like when you do this, I need you to do it differently, and to continue to show up and do that kind of work with the family. And then some of the relationships, you have to create boundaries of separation if it just continues to be something that causes you more harm than good. You're not going to be able to have harmonious relationships with everyone in your family, regardless of how much you love them. And one of the things that was most valuable that therapists told me over the years was, you don't have to be in contact with the person to love the person. You can love them from a distance, you can pray for them, you can wish them well, but you don't have to be in contact with them if it's not serving you or if it's causing you harm. And that was a permission that I couldn't really give myself. It took a long time for me to give myself that permission, but I think it was important because it's like that mask instructions that you get in the airplane, like you have to put your own mask on first before you put it on someone else. If I'm constantly being negatively impacted by people, then I'm not taking care of myself, and that has to be the first priority, or you can't build a foundation for these relationships and this kind of healthy family life. That's my 2 cents about family.
I think it's a very beautiful aspect to be able to acknowledge that sometimes it doesn't get fixed. And you can't, and it doesn't matter how much you work at it. And I think taking into account that the two communities that we're talking about, especially in mental health Awareness Week, there's a huge amount of trauma in relation to how does one's family see you, and how are you engaged, and how are you involved. So it's really lovely to hear that you share that, and that does come out in the book. I'm going to begin to wrap this up, if that's okay. Not that I want to, but so thank you, Dr. Gabby, for your time today, for writing your book. In my opinion, you have beautifully linked intuitive spiritual awareness with the experience of life's traumas, your life's traumas, and how they're not mutually exclusive, and yet they are. I'll leave the last response to you for the audience of both Healing Awareness Week and Mental Health Awareness Week, which is, would it be true to say that your book acknowledges the value of both intuitive spiritual awareness with the experience of life's traumas, and that it's okay to find story in both values?
100% yes. Yeah, 100% yes. I write about in the book that my intuition is very inconvenient, which I think it's hilarious, and I think other people might be able to resonate. You'll have intuitions that are telling you to do things that you don't want to do, and it's your work to do them anyway. And when you do them, you'll find yourself more and more aligned spiritually and closer to your path and your purpose. And so I would invite the listeners to listen to themselves and to take that risk, to trust, and to follow that intuition, for sure.
Well, really lovely spending time speaking. Very much. I appreciate it, and take care.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.